Live, and here we are at the Gamification Revolution. I'm your host, Gabe Zickerman. It is technically the start of our third season, which seems like a random idea because we get to start our seasons whenever we want, but we like to do them starting right after Gamification Summit. And today, for our first episode of the third season of the Gamification Revolution, I'm pleased to welcome someone who I've worked with for a really long time, Jessie Rogers. Hi, Jessie.
Hi. Hey, Gabe. Hey, everyone.
So some of you may know Jessie and some of you may not, but she's played an integral role in the growth and development of the gamification industry. She actually helped us launch the first GSummit way back in 2011 in San Francisco and worked with us in a number of the events. And at this past Gamification Summit, which happened in San Francisco just a few weeks ago in mid-April, Jessie was there giving us tremendous interviews with, I guess it was 16 of the top speakers from the conference.
Right.
And some of you who were there at the event would have seen Jessie um, doing those interviews out on the show floor. And so, Jessie, here's the question for you.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think in that range? You talked to a wide range of people.
Right.
What did you think were some of the most interesting things that you heard from those experts about gamification?
Sure. Well, I think, at the show in general, and certainly among the speakers that I had the chance to talk with individually, the theme of transformation of this industry really just was a constant. And on top of that, this layer of all of these discussions about motivating different audiences. And this year, a lot of that was centered around enterprise gamification and engagement, in large part because of some of the abysmal data that has been coming out from Gallup, for instance, about how unmotivated and unengaged massive numbers of employees are in the US workforce in particular. So there was a lot of talk about really taking a much deeper look at understanding different audiences, different psychologies, if you will, and how to motivate them. And that was a constant, whether it was with mass media or education or actual game design or the enterprise. So that was really sort of the resounding theme.
So dialing back to that first G Summit, when we first kicked that thing off in 2011,
Right.
Could you have predicted that the workforce piece would have been such a big part of the discussion? Does that catch you off guard in any way?
No, and I think that, the sort of launch pad for gamification really came from the consumer side, right? We would see a lot of game-based marketing happening with major brands. The actual literal application of games to marketing campaigns and to communities and to social media and social commerce, et cetera. So I think this sort of look more internally at organizations really is a new development. And in terms of its potential, I mean, again, not to focus on the negative, but most of the workforce in the United States is not engaged and equipped to be successful in their jobs. And that is a huge opportunity. So I think it shows that we've only really begun to scratch the surface in terms of how businesses can learn from this industry.
It is really kind of interesting because you and I we've worked together, many times over the years. Do you really think, in all the teams that you've worked with and all the people that you manage, do you really think that employees have gotten less engaged over time, or do you think it's more that our expectations are going up for how we expect people to multitask?
Well, I think Maggie Buggy from Capgemini expressed it in really literal terms, where companies have focused very heavily on investing massive amounts of dollars into their organizations and their digital infrastructure without really acknowledging the fact that the workforce may not be able to keep up with that, either because of lack of skill, lack of understanding, being trained to do things one way and being expected to adapt overnight to doing them in a very different way. So I think it's not necessarily a new thing that workforces are not particularly engaged, but it's becoming a more expensive mistake to ignore their lack of engagement these days because of these huge investments in technology that are happening. So Is it new? No. Is it more critical? Yes.
You know, I have so many questions for you, and I
Sure.
know that the people watching us today on Gamification Revolution also have questions for you. And just as a reminder, if you're live with us here on Freecast right now, you can ask your questions by clicking on the buttons that say submit a question or camera. If you actually have a camera, we can even join you online to ask questions of Jessie, who is on Twitter at @SFGamify, or of me. And we are talking, Jessie Rogers and I are talking about the amazing GSummit that just happened a couple of weeks ago in San Francisco. If you weren't able to join us live at GSummit, you can purchase access to the videos from the conference. We recorded all of the amazing videos from the conference. Not all of them came out perfectly, but we got almost everything. And you can purchase access to those videos by clicking on the link that you see on the screen. It's gsummit.com. And if you go to gsummit.com, you can find a link directly to register for the video access. You buy HD access to almost all the amazing, there were 70 speakers at GSummit, hear all of their startling insights and gain from their knowledge across a wide range of topics like marketing and HR and strategy and social good, which is what we were talking about. So just to kind of pivot on that for 1 second, Jessie. So
Sure.
one of the things that we heard a lot, we were just talking about Maggie Buggy from Capgemini talking about this sort of enterprise framework.
Right.
I noticed, Maggie's talk at the conference, did you get a chance to actually see her speak live?
Yes.
The event? Okay. So Maggie's talk at the conference was somewhat polarizing. So you could see on MemeCube, on the online discussion forum, many people sort of reacting to the kind of structured, big consulting enterprise, grids of how people are adapting the technology commentary with this sort of look of like, oh my God, this is boring by comparison to all the other speeches that we're hearing, people talking about inspiring design and changing the world and so on.
Right.
What was your take?
Well, I come from the consumer side as a marketer, and typically those are the things sort of on a personal level that resonate with me the best. But as an employee who has been in very big company frameworks, I've experienced firsthand some of the dilemmas that she was talking about that are being faced by the workforces of the companies that Capgemini represents. Certainly, Capgemini has a consultant's outlook, and they work for the company, not for the employee. But it doesn't mean that they're not serving the employee in that function as well, because what everybody wants to do is feel secure in their job, feel wanted, and feel like a contributor at work, feel like their company values them and understands what their pain points are. So I don't think it serves one side of the equation. I think that the net result of companies that listen to this are going to be positive for the workforce as well.
To me, it was also kind of startling, and I don't know how you sort of feel about it, also having seen the arc of all these different events and been involved in GSummit from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, beyond just having this like huge explosion in the number of talk, isn't it interesting to have, as much as maybe you could say, okay, well, we don't really necessarily want to hear these like corporate slides with all the corporate talk on them.
Mm-hmm.
GSummit's much more about these design case studies. But doesn't it say something? Does it say something about what's happening with gamification to see organizations like Capgemini there with models and frameworks about it? What does it mean?
Well, I think that the big lesson for me is that I can derive inspiration and learning from really anyone. It doesn't have to be somebody who does exactly what I do for a living, and it doesn't even have to be in an industry I'm necessarily familiar with. The lessons of engagement, they say this about marketing as well. It's a discipline, and once you understand the basics, you should be able to apply it across a variety of industries and companies. So I think that's the same with gamification. These principles are really elemental, and understanding how human beings work and how they're motivated and how they respond and engage with each other is a universal theme. So I think actually hearing it from different people who aren't the people you talk to every day or who are part of your sort of smaller network is really important, and one of the best things about the show. You can take lessons away from surprising sources. Education, for instance. I've never been an educator, but educators have something to teach all of us about how to keep people interested and informed and engaged.
one of the toughest things about the show, I think, to justify to people, and I get this kind of criticism from people who haven't been, but then the positive support from people who have been, when I program the content for the show, that at GSummit, we have this kind of eclectic mix of speakers. And oftentimes, rather than letting people kind of segment into their corner, to go off into their corner and be like, well, I'm in finance, and so I only want to hear about gamification and banks and I'm in education, and so I just want to focus on how games are transforming the classroom. That even though those are interesting topics on their own, I've been trying to, part of my mission or vision has been to kind of put everybody together and force us to, as much as possible, digest the design and engagement lessons of each other,
Right.
so that we can synthesize those things for our own use, right? Seeing how those things are related.
Yeah.
But it's kind of been a big challenge for me, and I feel like, do you think you have to actually come to the show to actually experience that, or do you, because you've been to it and heard from both sides? What do you think about that approach?
Well,
And I'm open to the criticism, by the way.
Oh, it's not criticism. I think that live events are extremely important for a number of reasons. First of all, half of the education at GSummit takes place with the interpersonal conversations outside of the lecture hall. So meeting other people, I remember standing there during one of the parties, and I met people from Sri Lanka, Mexico, Canada, and France, all within about 10 feet of me. And they're all coming together and sharing totally different cultural perspectives, different business perspectives, different industries. And that's not something that you can replicate in a non-personal atmosphere. You can't just have a cocktail and have some banter with somebody and step away totally inspired in a new way. But that said, the content definitely does run a really broad spectrum. But to your point, I think taking yourself outside of your job and outside of the way that you think of things on a daily basis is a really important part of this event as well. And sometimes you can see a problem or a challenge and a solution in a whole new way when you listen to somebody that you would never be exposed to in your day-to-day. So really important component of the show.
Let me ask you a challenge, a different kind of challenge, and taking a small departure. So you got to interview, as part of the process of making these behind-the-scenes interviews, which are going to be available shortly online. And for those of you who are watching and listening to this broadcast today, we've got a special little prize for you who are joining us today that we'll reveal shortly. But you made all these amazing videos with 16 of the top thought leaders who are at Gamification Summit this year. Who was the cutest?
Oh boy.
You don't have to say me.
Well, that was of course the obvious answer, but we didn't really get to spend as much time together as I would have liked. This is a totally self-serving answer, but Jessie Rogers is somebody who fascinates and inspires and really motivates me, primarily because my background is in media, so the programs that he does.
Right, for people who don't know.
Yeah.
For people who don't know, Jessie is SVP at NBC Universal. He's been elemental in bringing gamification to NBC, to the broadcaster, starting with USA Network's programs like Psych, where he was one of the first big case studies of gamification. I mean, so many years ago, and he's continued to be a great friend of the event and deliver these just amazing talks every year. Yeah. Sorry, Jessie. Go ahead.
Oh no, thanks for introducing him. But the idea that he was able to come, and he's been involved with the event since the beginning, since we first did the show 3 years ago here in San Francisco, and to see the just hockey stick effect that engagement programs have had on audience engagement for USA Network, for instance, you can't argue with that. And what we all want from this is results, and we want measurable impact, and we want to know that we're not just going on instinct, that this is really provable in terms of the effect, and that the resource and time and thought investment is worthwhile. So I love to geek out on that. I have definitely become a person who engages in the multi-screen experience with shows that I love. So it resonates with me personally and professionally. But I spoke with so many amazing people. It's hard to pick.
Don't you think that Okay, well, that was very diplomatic, but you immediately jumped to say Jesse Redness, and I frequently hear
Yeah.
people say, "God, he's the most handsome. He's the most handsome. He certainly dressed well this time around."
He wore
But
gingham.
do you? Yes, he did. He's snappy dresser,
Yeah.
and people on MemeCube, which, by the way, if you're interested in also reading the transcript of the conference's social media insight, we built this application called MemeCube that allowed people to network using Twitter and quickly boil up the most interesting and exciting ideas. Ivan will put the link up to m.gsummit.com so you can take a look at MemeCube in action. But there were many comments. You can actually go and watch the social media activity from the event online. There are many comments on MemeCube about how well dressed he was, how professional his videos were, how he was representing for New York. But a more serious question about Jesse Redness.
Mm-hmm.
So the second and third screen take away from television attention in a way, right?
Yes.
And yet Jesse's made his whole career out of making the second and third screen experiences of his TV shows so compelling.
Yeah.
So at some point, we have this whole cycle of, audiences are really distracted, consumers are disengaged, employees are disengaged. So gamification providers and experts go in and create systems to try to re-engage them. But what do you think? Isn't this kind of like a vicious circle? Like, if we're pulling people away from television to do this thing online, and then we feel good about doing that, aren't we?
I wouldn't use the word vicious circle. I would talk about it as a very healthy circle, actually. And I think that, the brands that are taking risks and handing over the reins a little bit to their viewers, for instance, in the case of USA Network, and Jesse and I talked about this in my interview with him, it's not a safe place to go. It feels really risky. You're inviting commentary from an audience that typically you've had a very one-way relationship with. So it can be a scary place for some brands to go. And I think the fact that they took that risk and took that leap and really believed in the viral and outside of the living room, and that media is really a real important part of people's lives, and allowed them to engage in a number of ways with it, aside from 40 minutes of television watching, I think is a brilliant move. But that risk is there, and I think it's there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, of course.
Okay, sorry, I thought I lost you for a second. So, this is something I talked to James Gatto about as well. James from Pillsbury Law, who's an attorney and an expert in really kind of mitigating the risk of opening up your brand and your voice to the outside world and inviting them in. So this was a theme that came up a couple of times. It can be scary, and it needs to be managed in an authentic and a real way in order for brands not to alienate consumers or users instead of doing what they want to do, which is build closer relationships with them. But I think that denying or avoiding that kind of interaction and that kind of alternative interaction with your brand is really short-sighted.
And ultimately, I think to some extent, I've been making this argument in my book, The Gamification Revolution, which the podcast is named similarly, which just came out in April, right before the conference. For those who don't have it, it's at gamrev.com. I've been making this argument. Maybe we have no choice. I mean, is the time for arguing some of this stuff has passed, hasn't it, Jesse? Like whether or not people will watch a second or third screen. I mean, at this point, can you as a television broadcaster even say, I'm going to try to fight that meme? How are you going to fight that?
You can't, and I think that you're undervaluing your own IP if you do. An example, I chatted off screen with Jessie Redness too about this. I'm a huge devotee of The Walking Dead. And after the show ends, it has such an emotional impact. I want to talk to people about it. I want to go, oh my God, what just happened? What's going to happen to this person? I'm so worried. You actually really are emotionally involved, and having ways to share that with others is really, really important. It's a way of sort of getting therapy. So you watch Talking Dead afterward, and you get online and you answer trivia questions and respond to blog posts. And And it really actually makes it a much more whole experience rather than being sort of stuck with this stuff that you just watched and not really having an outlet for your feelings about it. And I think it extends far beyond media.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And in fact, speaking about extension and the reach of gamification, we have a question here from Kartik Sanghavi. Thanks, Kartik, for the question, which is about using gamification in a large multinational and the kind of cross-cultural,
Right.
aspects of this particular question. Of course, I noticed that we have Mario Herger here, a frequent speaker at
Mario.
Gamification Summit, actually in watching the show live with us today. This is Mario's core bailiwick to talk about the kind of the global reach of gamification. What did you learn about that topic, if anything, Jessie? And what do you have to add to the question of how we reach the world with gamification?
Well, and this was something I brought up with a couple of the speakers I interviewed as well. And Mario did actually take some time out of his extremely busy gamification for the enterprise workshop to talk to me about it. I think that the reality is that we're all human beings, and we are all motivated by, some universal things. We certainly all have different types of motivation, but it's not a one size fits all. I think you really do have to, as a global organization, think about cultural differences, even insider humor. Humor should how it's different in different parts of the world, and what the culture and personality of those regions are.
Do you feel like we
and
have,
linguistically.
yeah, well, do you think that we have this whole thing, like gamification obviously has this big footprint in America. Aren't some of our concepts here feel very American, don't they? Like certainly the way that people take gamification. It's technologically oriented. I don't agree that everything's about competition, but it's often people talk about it being competitive.
Yeah.
This kind of technology competition thing feels a little bit North American, and maybe doesn't scale quite as well to other parts of the world.
Right. Well, and I think, I personally am not somebody who responds well to competition. So I understand what it's like. We've talked extensively about Bartle player typing. I'm a socializer explorer. I do not respond to competition. I like to help people. I like to share. I like to socialize. So those are really important rewards for me. Certainly I like to accomplish things and do a good job, but I don't need to see my name at the top of the list. I like to be a contributor, not a winner per se.
Right.
It's certainly cultural in terms of a global perspective, but it's cultural in terms of just within an organization with a team of 3 or 4 people. You could have very different cultural perspectives.
Yeah, and I don't even mean to, Karthik, I think it's a great question. I don't mean to demean in any way or diminish the question of major cultural differences between countries, regions, religions, ethnic backgrounds. I think those are all very significant. But also in many organizations, there are large strata by age and large strata by technological sophistication that actually may be more influential than the culture. So, whether or not gamification resonates well with the audience may have more to do with how comfortable they are with things like an iPhone and what they think of things like a paper book, rather than necessarily whether or not they grew up in the Middle East or they grew up in Western Europe, which influence them, right? But
Right.
this is a
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Kes Sampanthar and Kes from Synergy, and I talked about that very topic. Within a sales force, within an organization, for instance, you might have people who really do things the old-fashioned way and have been there for a long time and are great producers. And then you have millennials that are much more comfortable using technology in their jobs. And how can gamification kind of bridge that age gap or that generation gap and get them to work together as teammates in spite of the fact that they approach things very differently?
Right.
So he had some really interesting things to say about that.
Yeah, and I'm sure that it's super interesting. Kez also gave a great talk actually at Gamification Summit which of course you can see
Mm-hmm.
by getting access to the videos on their process and methodology, how they engaged Verizon's sales team, which I thought was a really
Yes.
fascinating case study for the power of gamification to engage people in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I know that across the 16 people that you managed to interview, some of these top thought leaders, there were a range of interesting kind of perspectives. One of the people who
Mm-hmm.
probably is most closely associated with the gamification movement, certainly its global impact, is Professor Kevin Werbach from UPenn, the guy
Right.
who created the gamification course on Coursera in 2012, and of course reprised it in 2013. What were some of the interesting kind of highlights of talking to Kevin, whose talk was of course very well received?
Well, I think the sort of charming thing about his experience with this is that he didn't expect it to be successful, and it just blew the lid off of anybody's expectations. So the fact that he was very humble about his own expertise and how many people were going to be interested in what he had to say about it was really surprising to me, because he's an incredibly brilliant, educated, has this amazing background. I mean, everyone should read his bio because he's done 100 really cool things in his career.
Yeah.
So the fact that he was astounded by the number of people that were interested in taking that course, I think was surprising to me. You and I have been around this for a while and seen the sort of vocabulary growing everywhere in every industry and the understanding of what this means. So for somebody who's been educating business school students at one of the best business schools in the country, for him to be surprised that it would take off, I thought was actually kind of sweet.
Well, and to his credit, one of the interesting things about what he did, which is the subject of his GSummit talk, the long form talk that he gave
Mm-hmm.
on stage, was how he actually gamified the course and the little ways that he thought to
Right.
be surprise and delight. I myself was blown away, by Professor Werbach's, view of the kind of intensity curve of the course and how he mapped that to the
Right.
curve, progression to mastery in gamified design, which I thought was a really, really unique insight and something that someone would only have really if they kind of were on both sides of that equation. And this actually brings us to the today's special giveaway for our viewers of the Gamification Revolution. If you happen to be joining us live on Spreecast or via the podcast online, we want to give you a little bit of an early preview of some of one of Jessie's most interesting one-on-one intimate conversations about gamification and how it works, which was with Professor Werbach. That video, which was available to you guys exclusively now, before the videos are available broadly online, can be found at the gamification.co/video page. You'll find Jessie's interview with Kevin Werbach available early access for all of our viewers and listeners to the podcast. Check that out. We'll have the rest of Jessie's interviews with gamification leaders coming out over the next few weeks, as well as the full set of courses sort of online, are the full set of sessions available online, from all of the GSummit speakers that were there. One last question for you, Jessie, before we wrap up for today. What do you think about
Sure.
women's contribution to the gamification movement? Lots of discussion, certainly in the games industry for many years, about what the role is of women in leadership. How do you feel we're doing as an industry representing, female executives, women thought leaders, and designers in gamification?
Well, refreshingly, roughly 50% of the speakers I was able to get interviews with were women. And their perspectives were, I didn't really see necessarily a gender bias or a different way of looking at things. I think, again, coming back to there's a universal foundation here about how this works. And, I think it's nice to see this offshoot of games, which essentially this really did sort of spring from game development, be so full of really brilliant and really influential women. Nicole Lazaro is just somebody who I love to see at this show and talk to. She's so brilliant, and she's been fighting the good fight for women in games for a long time. And now she's in a field that is a little bit more equitably distributed between men and women, I think. But you know, I don't necessarily think a male or female perspective is better or worse in terms of gamification, but it is really nice to see an even distribution.
I am super excited about it myself. Actually, it's funny because occasionally people will say, "Hey, how come there aren't more women speaking at GSummit?" I'm like, compare the list of amazing women speaking at the conference to the list of women at most tech conferences, and you know, I'm very proud of the contribution. I'm excited about all of those things, and I'm excited to let you all know as well, if you're a listener or viewer of the Gamification Revolution podcast that and web show, that my new online course is now live on Udemy. I've hinted at it. I've told some of you about it. I've talked about it a little bit. It is now live. Level 1 certification course for gamification, from which you can earn a certificate in gamified design that you can display on your profile, is now available online through Udemy, through exclusive partnership between Udemy, Engagement Alliance, and TechCrunch as part of TechCrunch's Protect You. This first course is available now. It's available at a substantial discount as part of the rollout of this new platform. You can take this course. It's got all new material from me, lots of bonus content from GSummit and from other contexts. And at the end, of course, you can actually earn your certification in gamified design. And as a small bonus, if you take this course, you actually get a free digital copy of Gamification by Design, my second book, as part of the course. So it's an amazing value, an amazing opportunity to start down the road of earning your certification in gamified design. And all of the different things that we do are part of this cycle to help increase engagement and get the community together, move the discussion about gamification engagement forward, as it is for GSummit, which just happened, and the Gamification Revolution web show. I want to thank today's awesome guest, a longtime friend of ours, a great partner of our effort, Jessie Rogers. You can follow Jessie online at SF Gamify. Thanks for being here, Jessie.
Pardon me?
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Gabe. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody, for being part of it. In the meantime, we'll see you back next week with more great guests and more gamification revolution to share. In the meantime, keep having fun.